The Last Days of Our Cosmos, A Journey to the Edge of the Universe. Chapter 1. Departure. The engines of the space shuttle roared to life as the countdown began. This was it. The moment that would change everything. For months, the world had been waiting anxiously for this day. The day when the first humans would be sent off to colonize the distant planet of Alpha Centauri. The crew of the shuttle, a group of carefully selected experts from around the world, had trained for years to make this journey possible. As they strapped themselves into the cramped seats of the shuttle, they all felt a mixture of excitement and fear. They knew that what lay ahead would be the most dangerous mission in human history. The commander of the mission, John Blackwood, took a deep breath and began the final checks. He and his team had gone through these procedures hundreds of times in simulation, but now it was real. There was no room for error. As the countdown reached its final seconds, a hush fell over the control room at Cape Canaveral. The tension was palpable. The entire world was watching this historic moment. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition, shouted the mission control officer. With a thunderous roar, the shuttle lifted off the launch pad and streaked into the sky. The sheer power of the engines pushed the crew back into their seats. As they cleared the Earth's atmosphere, they felt weightless for the first time. For a brief moment, they all felt a deep sense of awe and wonder as they gazed out of the window at the endless expanse of space. But then reality set in. They had a long, dangerous journey ahead of them, and they needed to stay focused. John Blackwood turned to his crew and gave them a reassuring smile. "We're off to a good start," he said. "But we've got a long way to go. Let's make history." Chapter 2. Into the unknown. Days turned into weeks as the crew made their way towards Alpha Centauri. The initial excitement began to wear off, replaced by a sense of tension and unease. They were truly on their own, hurtling through the vast unknown depths of space. Despite the carefully planned routines and protocols, there were unforeseen challenges and setbacks. Equipment malfunctioned, power fluctuations occurred, and communication blackouts with mission control became more frequent. Each time, the team scrambled to fix the problem, not knowing what other unknown dangers lay ahead. The isolation began to take a toll on the crew. They were in a constant state of alert, never allowing themselves to let their guard down. Sleep was elusive, and tension mounted as they began to realize the enormity of their mission. Then, one dark and silent night, the crew was jolted awake by a sudden impact on the hull of the shuttle. The entire vessel shook violently, throwing them off balance. The emergency alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to react. "Report!" shouted John Blackwood, as he struggled to get to his feet. "We've been hit by debris. It's damaged the engines and our power core," replied one of the crew members. The reality of their situation hit them hard. They were suddenly stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no communication or means of contacting mission control. The shuttle was rapidly losing power and air. Panic set in. "We need to fix this now," shouted John, trying to keep his voice steady. "Get to work, people." As the crew quickly assessed the damage, they realized that this was more than just a simple repair job. The damage had caused a chain reaction that threatened to destroy the entire shuttle. With little time left, The team worked furiously to fix the engines and save themselves from certain death. Hours passed in a blur of activity, sweat, and fear. Finally, with a lurch, the shuttle roared back to life. The power was restored, and the trajectory corrected. John looked around at his crew. They were all exhausted, but alive. "We're not out of the woods yet, people," he said, his voice hoarse. "But we're still on course. And we're not giving up now." Chapter 3. Stranded. The repairs had been successful, but at a great cost. The crew had depleted much of their resources, and more challenges lay ahead. They were barely halfway through their journey, and the realization that they could not afford any more mishaps weighed heavily on their minds. The days that followed were filled with intense boredom and loneliness. The crew kept to their duties, their communication with one another minimal, each lost in their own thoughts. They ate tasteless rations, slept uneasily, and watched the endless void that stretched out beyond their window. One day, as they went about their chores, a faint voice crackled through their communication system. It was from Mission Control. "This is Mission Control. Can you hear us?" The crew was overjoyed. Finally, a connection to the outside world. They eagerly responded, hoping for reassurance or help. But their joy was short-lived. The transmission was filled with static, making it difficult to understand. They managed to get a few words through, enough to realize that something was wrong back on Earth. They pieced together the details as best they could. Natural disasters, political unrest, a collapse of global economies. The world they had left was falling apart. The realization hit them hard. They were not only stranded in the abyss of space, but they might be the only hope for the future of humanity. A burden they had never thought about. The crew had a decision to make. Continue forward towards the unknown planet, which may or may not be habitable, or turn back towards a dying, broken world. It was a decision that weighed heavily on their minds for days. Eventually, they came to a unanimous conclusion. They had come too far, endured too much, to turn back now. They would go forward, to Alpha Centauri. As they continued on their journey, the crew was filled with a sense of determination, but also uncertainty. They had no idea what would happen when they arrived on the alien world, but they were willing to take their chances. With each passing day, the pressure built, emotions ran high, and the crew struggled to stay focused on the task ahead. Chapter 4. Betrayal. The shuttle moved steadily through space, its crew focused on their mission. But unknown to them, something sinister was brewing within their own ranks. One day, as the crew gathered for a briefing on their landing procedures, one of the scientists, Dr. Sarah Johnson, suddenly pulled out a gun and pointed it at John Blackwood. "Sorry, Commander," she said, her voice calm and determined. "But I cannot allow you to lead us any further." The crew was stunned. They had never seen Dr. Johnson exhibit any signs of aggression or instability. What had brought her to this point? John Blackwood, for his part, remained calm. He had trained for all sorts of scenarios, and he knew that his life was at risk. "Put the gun down, Dr. Johnson," he said firmly. "This is not the way to solve whatever issues you have with me." But Dr. Johnson only sneered. "You think you're so noble, Commander," she spat. "But you're just a puppet of the government. You're leading us to our deaths, and I won't stand for it." The other crew members watched in horror as the situation unfolded. They knew that there was no going back now. Suddenly, another member of the crew, a pilot named Alexei Ivanov, grabbed a wrench and lunged at Dr. Johnson. There was a scuffle, and the gun went off. The sound echoed through the shuttle, the noise deafening. The room fell into chaos as the crew tried to separate the fighters. But it was too late. Dr. Johnson lay on the ground, bleeding profusely from a gunshot wound to the chest. Ivanov stood over her, his face a mask of rage and terror. The crew quickly tended to Dr. Johnson's wound, but it was obvious that it was fatal. As she took her last breaths, the crew gathered around her. "What have we done?" whispered one of the scientists. They all knew that this incident would have far-reaching consequences. The trust and camaraderie that had guided them thus far was shattered in an instant. The crew was now divided, and they realized that their journey would never be the same. Chapter 5. The Cosmic Wonders. The shuttle continued its journey through the infinite expanse of space, fraught with tension and unease. The crew members kept to themselves, each lost in their own thoughts and regrets. But as they approached their destination, something strange began to happen. The darkness of space began to give way to a stunning array of sights and sounds, beautiful and awe-inspiring. Stars glittered like diamonds, galaxies spiraled in cosmic dances, and nebulae glowed with colors beyond imagining. The crew was mesmerized. For the first time since their mission began, they found themselves united in a shared sense of wonder and reverence. They spent countless hours gazing out the windows, trying to take in everything the universe had to offer. They were humbled by its vastness and complexity and thrilled by its beauty. As they got closer to their landing site, they began to encounter other wonders of the universe. They marveled at a black hole's gravitational pull, watched as a supernova exploded, and witnessed the birth of new stars. Their faith in the mission was restored. They felt that they were part of something greater, and that what they had left behind was insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Finally, their destination was in sight. An alien planet, unlike anything they had ever seen before, approached. They landed at the base camp and began setting up. As they stepped out onto the surface, they were taken aback by the strangeness of the world around them. The air was laden with unfamiliar gases and the sky bleached white. The terrain was jagged and uneven, with massive red cliffs and strange mineral formations. The crew began to study the environment, gathering data to gauge the planet's habitability. They worked tirelessly for days, fueled by their sense of purpose and the sheer majesty of their surroundings. They found ancient ruins, strange organisms, and unexpected phenomena that filled them with wonder. It was as if the universe was speaking to them directly, in a language that only they could understand. And they felt a sense of responsibility to honor the silent conversation. Chapter 6. Race against time. As they explored the planet, the crew began to realize that they were facing a new challenge. There was something off about the environment, something that made their work all the more urgent. The planet's atmosphere was changing rapidly. The air had become toxic, and the temperature had begun to rise at an alarming rate. The crew found themselves working in extreme conditions, struggling to stay cool and breathe. They knew that time was running out. The planet was not going to be habitable for much longer, and they needed to gather everything they could before it was too late. But things were not going according to plan. The crew was facing equipment malfunctions, power fluctuations, and communication blackouts. They were forced to work even harder, risking their own lives to complete their research. As the situation grew more dire, the crew's sense of unity began to disintegrate. They argued more, pointed fingers, and lost focus on what really mattered. It was then that they received an urgent message from Mission Control. A massive solar flare was headed their way, and it was likely to hit the planet within hours. They had to leave, but they had not gathered enough data. The crew scrambled to collect as much as they could, working through injuries and exhaustion. When the solar flare finally hit, it felt like the end of the world. The shuttle was hit by waves of radiation, and the crew was thrown around like rag dolls. They lost communication with Mission Control, and for a moment, everything was chaos. But then, miraculously, the shuttle came back online. The crew members gasped for air as they reasserted control over the battered vessel. It was time to take off and head back to Earth. As they made their way through space, the crew was acutely aware of the ticking clock. The data they had collected was their only hope, their only chance at making a difference. They worked furiously to analyze the information, despite being exhausted and traumatized by their ordeal. They were racing against time, but they managed to make it back to Earth. They handed over their findings to Mission Control, hoping beyond hope that it would make a difference. The data would be analyzed for years to come, and it would lay the foundation of a new era of space travel. The crew had accomplished something truly amazing, something that would reverberate throughout human history. But as they looked back on their journey, they knew that the true wonder lay not in the triumph, but in the struggle itself. Chapter 7. The Final Frontier. The mission was a success, but the crew members were forever changed by their experience. They had been to the edge of the universe and back, and they had seen things that few human eyes had ever witnessed. For some, the journey was a transformative experience, a validation of their existence and an affirmation of their beliefs. For others, it was a trial by fire, a test of their resilience and their ability to cope with the stress of isolation and danger. But for all of them, it was the ultimate adventure, a journey into the unknown that would define them for the rest of their lives. They had faced insurmountable odds, made difficult sacrifices, and pushed the limits of human endurance. And now, as they prepared to return to their families, their friends, and their homes, they knew that there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. They had surpassed expectations, shattered limits, and inspired countless others to dream of a better future. They had been pioneers, explorers, and adventurers. They had been the latest in a long line of individuals who had pushed humanity forward, into the final frontier. As they said their goodbyes to the shuttle, to the stars, and to the universe they had been privileged to see, they knew that they would never forget what they had been a part of. They had seen the cosmos in all its glory, and they had witnessed the wonders of creation. They had felt the transcendent power of the universe, and they had come to understand their place within it. As they stepped back onto Earth, they knew that they were different, that they had been transformed by the journey. They had left as mortals, but they had returned as something more, something greater. They had journeyed to the stars and back, and they had seen and experienced things that would stay with them forever. And they knew that they had achieved the impossible, that they had reached beyond the limits of what they had once thought was possible. They had gone beyond what anyone had ever done before them, and in doing so, they had become part of something much larger than themselves. They were pioneers of the final frontier, and they had left their mark on the universe.